Before we jump into this podcast, let's just have a first word from our sponsors, NordVPN, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential travelling companion. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, easily switching your virtual location to access apps and websites in other countries. But if you're out of the country, make sure that you've got NordVPN to be able to use your subscriptions and watch the live sport that you might miss. If you're at home, use it to see if you can save money with products that might be cheaper in another region. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. The link is also in the podcast description.
Hello and welcome along to the latest episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show from the Manchester Evening News. My name is George Smith and I'm joined as always by the man himself, Samuel Luckhurst, who is out in the States, who in Fosby is in something that looks like a bit like a car parking lot that does resemble a mixed zone in the US. But Samuel, you've been out there for a few days now. How are things going?
Yes, I'm at Soldier Field, which is the Chicago Fire's stadium. United are training here. We've just watched a very brief chunk of it. There were a lot of stretches going on using resistant straps as they warmed up and limbered up for their session. And then, of course, it was the usual keep ball drills, and that was our 15 minutes. So I think those opportunities, as people know, probably from seeing the clips online, it's just about getting a little bit of colour. I mean, the funny thing that we saw was one of the fitness coaches, Charlie Owen, modelling the cooling jacket because, of course, they're playing in New Jersey tomorrow. It's pretty hot here and humid in Chicago, although it's a little bit cooler after a big storm yesterday. But in New Jersey, it is likely to be a lot hotter. And having been there a couple of years ago, when United played against Arsenal at the MetLife, I can attest to how hot it gets in New York and New Jersey in July.
Yeah, well, we'll discuss a little bit more on that shortly. But before we go any further, we must offer a shout out to today's podcast sponsor, which is Saily, which is a brand owned by NordVPN. That is a new eSIM service app that you can use abroad if you're in desperate need of an internet connection. You can download Saily in your app store and use code Manchester at checkout to get 15% off your first purchase. For more information, please go to our description box. As you've mentioned there, Samuel, you've seen open training. That's one of the highlights of the tour. You get to see little snippets that you wouldn't otherwise normally see. Ruben Amorim is coming up shortly after we finish this podcast. It'll be the first chance for him to speak to the external media since the end of last season. Transfers are likely to be a dominant topic in this press conference that's coming up. Brian Mbeumo through the door early this week, as we discussed on Tuesday. Obviously, this will be a first chance for him, won't it, to talk about Matheus Cunha and Brian Mbeumo and give his verdict on what's been achieved so far this summer.
And he'll have Cunha sat next to him. Cunha's going to be attending the press conference as well. I think where it's a Premier League summer series, that's the way they do it here. It's the coach or the manager and the player fielding questions. So there is a lot to go at, and it'll be interesting to hear him amplify on the Cunha signing and the Mbeumo signing. Of course, I think there were a couple of decent sound bites that Amorim came out with on Cunha after the Leeds game in Stockholm last week, but I don't think he said a great deal about Mbeumo and where's he going to play. Does he see these two as two playmakers? There's a little golf buggy that's just driving past me at the moment, which I'm sure people can hear in the background. And also regarding transfers, as you quite rightly say, I think that will be dominated by the striker situation. And we know how good Amorim is for a quote and how he tends to, if there's a Ruben Amorim press conference, the chances are the back pages are going to be splashing on what he said. And it's a strange one because Cunha is, of course, he's one of the headline signings, not just for United this summer, but in the Premier League this summer. But because of the needs must and so many issues to address with Amorim, the chances are that Cunha may not get too many questions to answer, which I'm sure he won't be too sorry about. But as I said, there's always a lot to go out with that first press conference on a pre-season tour.
Yeah, most definitely. And obviously this is in the preparation for this opening friendly of the tour, which is against West Ham United this weekend. Samuel, obviously last weekend we saw the players storing respectively 45 minutes under their belts, Ruben Amorim naming 2 separate 11s for either half. It's probably the general expectation that they might increase their minutes. Potentially the starters may get up to an hour for this one against West Ham, and then others will come on at that point. But again, it's another opportunity for certain players to impress and try and catch the eye, isn't it?
They always are, and there's nothing really to read into these games. I don't think. Sometimes, certainly with Ten Hag, he did operate with a view of this is the team, this is the way. We might as well warm up now in preparation for the game, the first game of the season. And certainly when Mainoo was on tour a couple of years ago, he was playing really well, and you could tell that he was being ready not just to come into the first team squad, but to come into the first team for the start of the season. And unfortunately for him, he got injured in that Real Madrid game in Houston, and he was out for 4 months. I think it was late November by the time he came back. And Ten Hag admitted early into the season that Mainoo was being prepared to start the season against Wolves. So, but going off that team last week, which was it was like very rotational, to say the least. I don't think there was a great deal to look into it. If you maybe look at Chido starting ahead of Rasmus Hojlund, you think, well, is that significant? And then you see Toby Collier playing as a playmaker, you think, well, it's not that significant. But as I've said before, certainly with these pre-season tours, having I think this is my 8th one now that I've done, and a nine if you include a post-season tour. That the matches are not, I wouldn't say they're not memorable, because we have to remember them, and certainly with my with my memory as well, it's not too difficult remembering them, weirdly. But they're not the real reason why we're here. They are the reason we're here because they're playing the games here, but it's everything around it. So I don't think even the rights holders of the game out here will be wasting their time with a big Manchester United versus West Ham United preview, because it's just a pre-season game, and it's quite telling with these three matches, because of course it's part of the Premier League summer series, so it involves 4 teams each match day. It's 2 games for all 3 match days. United are the second team to play. They're the second match, which is not a surprise, because if it was, let's face it, if it was Manchester United kicking off the first game, I think a lot of people would be emptying the stadium, and not many would be sticking around for the second match. So it'll be interesting to see what the crowds are like, because it does feel like there has been a soccer saturation point in America with the Club World Cup recently, and some mixed crowds there, and some people very much just immune to its, I hesitate to say charm, because I think it was a pretty charmless competition when it's got Gianni Infantino's name engraved on the trophy. But there's a hell of a lot of soccer being played in America during the summers, and this is an unprecedented one for United, in that it's their 3rd successive pre-season tour in the States.
Well, one bonus of the Premier League Summer Series format is that there won't be any needless penalty shootouts played after games where the winner has already been determined. So there is one silver lining with that. But you mentioned there, Samuel, about Mainoo impressing a couple of years ago in the US prior to his injury, and he did very, very well in those couple of games before he got injured. Obviously, we saw him play in the second half against Leeds last Saturday. He looked quite bright from midfield. Would you like to see him maybe deployed alongside Bruno Fernandes for this game against West Ham this weekend?
I've no real preference, to be honest with you. That's down to Amorim. I think as a balance, can that work going forward? That's debatable. I think you've got to have someone defensive minded there. They've invested a lot of money in Samuel Luckhurst. Logically, I think that has got to be the midfield that starts the season. That's not to say that makes Mainoo a peripheral figure. He's still someone that Manchester United should absolutely be looking to keep, even though there is clearly an issue there where they've not tied him down on a new contract, and the chances are he will not start the season. And look, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that there could be a McTominay style scenario that develops there, in that if the midfield is clearly an area that United do still need to reinforce. But in order to do that, someone has to make way, and getting Toby Collier off the books for a season on loan, or selling him for a relatively frugal fee, is not going to cut it. So you're either looking at Casemiro being shifted, which I just don't think is going to happen, and I wrote about that earlier in the week, and that there have been attempts made to sell him, fruitless, as everyone can see. He's into the last year of his contract. A fee of £15 million would be required to sell him as well. I don't think anybody's going to come in with that money, even though he had a pretty strong end to last season with his Europa League form. He got back into the Brazil squad as well. That said, it's his old friend at Real Madrid, Carlo Ancelotti, who's in charge there now. So you have to factor that into it. And really, if it's not Casemiro, it's not going to be Ugarte. It's almost certainly not going to be Fernandes after he rejected the approach from Saudi Arabia. And it is, you look at Mainoo and you think he's not committed to a new contract. There is a chance that at some point in August the club could come in and offer United money, which I think, that works for us, and it allows us to sign this player who's going to reinforce the midfield. But I think they're on a slippery slope there, because of course it did somewhat backfire with McTominay, but I still completely understand why they sold McTominay, because the pressing need last summer was a defensive midfielder, and the identity, the choice of Ugarte was dubious, is dubious, but he is their choice, and they've got to try and make it work. With Mainoo, you fear that maybe his face doesn't fit in Amram's squad, but I remember writing after the Europa League final that in terms of the absolute must-dos for United, one of them was to effectively to compromise with Mainoo. That okay, you've got to try and he's only 20. There's got to be a way of making him work as a midfielder in that system. They've got a surefit of number 10s or possible number 10s. Mainoo is one of them. There's Xerxes, there's Mount, Mbumo, Cunha, Fernandes, Ahmad. I think that's the 7, isn't it? Maybe there's possibly another one who could play there. Mazraoui played as a number 10 last season. I suspect he will not be playing there at any point under Ruben Amorim, but that also has to be factored into it. Ultimately, they're very short in midfield. You even look in the first team profile on the website, I think it's 5 or 6 players, and one of them is Dan Gore, who, let's face it, is not a first team squad member. He's gone out on loan again. It feels like he's been out on loan for 18 months practically, and he's not really been in the fold regarding the senior squad at United. So my personal belief is that they should be trying to make it work with Kobbie Mainoo, because he is a hell of a talent, and he certainly had a difficult second full season, to say the least, last season. And a bit like Garnacho, he's Ten Hag's academy legacy. That seems to have somewhat counted against Garnacho, although there are clearly other reasons why he's on his way or wants to be on his way. With Mainoo, it is a little bit different, and I just hope for his sake and United's sake they can make it work. But things do change, and this time last year, Garnacho and Mainoo were 2 of the untouchables in that Manchester United squad, and that is no longer the case. But if they were to genuinely sell Kobbie Mainoo, they'd have to be getting someone better in, or someone more proven in, to replace him. But I just think the way it's playing out, that midfield situation, pragmatically, maybe United think they can get away with the 5 options that they have in a season that will have a lighter workload for no European football, and it's not ideal. But I think they probably look at it and think, well, Bruno can paper over the cracks, because he's done it for so long at the club anyway. It's not fair on him, but I think from a selfish perspective and a financial perspective, that could be their outlook on the situation.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how this midfield situation unfolds, and it could be another one of those that rumbles on quite late on into the window, Samuel. But you mentioned there about how this time last year, Mainoo and Garnacho were set up to be the key players. This time last year, we were also hoping Rasmus Hojlund was going to build on a pretty respectable first season at United. Obviously, had a really regressive season last year, but he's yet to have a full pre-season at United. Obviously, he arrived too late in 2023, got injured in the first game of the tour last year. How important do you believe these few games are for him, bearing in mind the striker search is yet to be solved?
It's more important for him than other players, certainly, because everybody knows that Manchester United want a striker. And even if he was to score 3 hat-tricks in 3 games out here, they would still need a striker. You can't read too much into these games. The game at the weekend, if you're looking at it in black and white terms, him not starting, you think, well, that's not a good sign. But of course, there are a lot of players who you would normally think they should be starting, and they started the second half rather than the first half. But it was more the fact that you just, even watching it on MUTV, there were still issues with his body language. He still has an issue with Diogo Dalot. There were a couple of times, one time in particular, which the broadcasters showed a replay of, where he used an expletive because he didn't think Dalot had played the pass quickly enough. And watching Dallot's reaction, he was pretty nonplussed by it. Whereas when he didn't pass the ball to him, most infamously against Sociedad in San Sebastian, he was apologetic. But now, these players, they know that Manchester United wants a new striker. So in a way, selfishly, they're kind of warming up to service a new striker. So Diogo Dalot, in his position, he's got a new squad number. He was the captain for the second half on Saturday. He's not going to lose a wink of sleep over Rasmus Hojlund, giving him a rollicking for not getting the ball quickly enough, even though Hojlund might have had a point. And there was another case in the second half where Hojlund felt as though the ball should have gone to him. And I think from Dalot, and it might have gone to Patrick Dorgu, who had a shot that went over or went wide. But another thing that I thought was interesting, when there was that goalmouth scramble at the end, and I think it was Mainoo hit the bar, didn't he, with the header, and then Heaven on the follow-up, it was cleared off the line by Melia. The guy who headed the ball across goal was Hojlund. Now, that's not a bad thing at all in terms of he's winning a header, but logically the striker should be much more central, closer to goal. He should be the one getting on the end of that header, or being there for the follow-up to possibly stick it away and put United 1-0 up. You think if someone's heading it back across goal, it should be Harry Maguire, and of course Maguire was off the pitch at that point. But that was another interesting thing I thought, just regarding his positioning, because his positioning has been, of course, a subject of debate, and he's got a fair amount of criticism for that in terms of he doesn't look like he is a natural around the penalty area, which is quite curious for a striker. But for his own sake, he really needs to have as productive a pre-season as possible. But he's got to see it as win-win, because if he's productive, maybe he's more attractive to clubs possibly interested in him. Inter Milan inquired about him at the start of the summer, and I still think there's a possibility that he could still leave, because let's face it, if they do sign a striker, which they still want to, then they can't have Xerxes, Hojlund, a new striker, and Chido Obi, to a lesser extent, in that first team squad. Someone has to make way, even though Xerxes is not really a striker, and you could consider him as one of the number 10s. But the fact of the matter is, he is an option to play up front, so the numbers don't add up. And Hojlund would be the logical one to make way, because Xerxes has had a creditable calendar year, and also where he got injured in, early or mid-April. When that happens to a player and they practically missed the entirety of the run-in, I know he came back very briefly for the Europa League final, but that was a desperate measure, let's face it. When that happens with a player getting injured, you just know there are not going to be any takers for them in the market. But maybe something could change. I mean, there was some interest from Italy in Xerxes in January after that, after his infamous substitution, 32nd minute against Newcastle. But the state of play, and in terms of performance-wise and form-wise, and who's more of an asset to the squad, you could argue it's Xerxes. You could also make the point that Hojlund's an out-and-out number 9. United have got enough number 10s as it is. Xerxes is probably a more sellable asset. Could that happen? But I think just trying to gauge the mood of it, the likelihood would be that Hojlund would go rather than Xerxes if they had to get rid of one of those two to facilitate a striker incoming. And the word from United is that they've got a little bit of headroom where Rashford's off the books permanently for a year with his salary covered in full. So they will save a lot of money with him out the door. They desperately need to get 3 separate fees for Garnacho, Sancho and Anthony. With Sancho, there's no choice there. He's out of contract next year. I still think Anthony, there may have to be another season-long loan with the vast majority of his wages covered, and maybe a fixed fee agreed on a permanent deal for next year. Garnacho, they've absolutely, his resale value is still quite high, despite the rancor that's been going on between him and Damarin. And when you take that all into account, you think, well, there's no reason whatsoever why they shouldn't sign a striker, even though I do think it's got to the point where they are going to have to compromise on the profile of striker that comes in. I highly doubt it will be someone with an age range similar to Liam Delap, who of course was the first choice, and only turned 22 in February, and the fact that you're seeing some strikers linked with them who are a fair bit older and in some cases pushing 30, I think that in itself is quite telling. If indeed they do want someone who's got Premier League nous and experience.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting to see how the cards fall, isn't it? There's obviously a limited number of attainable strikers out there this summer, and United accepted that several months ago, to be fair to them. But we will see what happens, Samuel. But that does mark the end of this episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever else you get your podcasts from. Also, make sure to leave a like and maybe a comment as well. Myself and Samuel will be back again at some point next week for Samuel to bring you all the very latest from out in the States, including a review of the West Ham game this weekend. Have a great weekend. Take care, and we'll catch you again very soon.